Now this is skirt number 3, which is the flared skirt, but I decided to take it to a whole new level by styling my old makes in the same fabric and show you how you could just take one fabric, one nude pair of shoes, and make it do what it do. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. My name is Rochelle from Rochelle.Handmade.Designs, and in this video we are talking about that next skirt in the summer skirt series. Now this is skirt number 3, which is the flared skirt, but I decided to take it to a whole new level by styling my old makes in the same fabric and show you how you could just take one fabric, one nude pair of shoes, and make it do what it do. All right, so this is the tribal collection. Now for this pattern, I am using New Look 6702. Now before we get started, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe button, and also turn on the notification bell so you are notified every time I upload a new video. So without further ado, of course, we're gonna get right on into the pattern review and then off to the sew along. All right, so let's go ahead and start off with the pattern description. So the pattern description for New Look 6702, which is this pattern right here, it's just a missus skirt with seaming, and then it is basically flares out and it's slim fitting through the hips. Now it does have a facing piece, a front and back facing, and a side zipper, which is an invisible zipper. That's the pattern description for this pattern. Let's talk about the skill level. So the skill level for this pattern, I believe, is rated as average, or maybe on the Simplicity website it's rated as easy. Either way, do I feel that it's easy? Yes, I feel that it's easy to sew. However, I wouldn't say it's complete beginner friendly pattern because there is a center section called the Godet, whatever, G-O-D-E-T. I'm gonna put it up on the screen. You tell me in the description box below, how do you pronounce it, okay? All right, so you do have that piece in the center. So I would say if you have never done that before, it can be a little tricky to sew to that dot without going past it and to get a clean, flawless finish, all right? Now, would I say that this is an intermediate pattern? Not necessarily. I wouldn't say that it's an intermediate beginner pattern. I think that it's not a beginner friendly pattern, but a beginner can do it. Do I say that it's an intermediate beginner pattern? The source is out on that one. So I'm gonna say it's right in between beginner friendly to sew the skirt, but a beginner can do it and it doesn't have to be an intermediate beginner. So I'm gonna say that intermediate beginner. I'll leave it at that, all right? Let's talk about notion shoes. So the only notion that you need is a 7-inch invisible zipper and thread and your sewing machine. Those are all the supplies that you need and the notions that you need in order to sew this easy skirt, all right? Let's talk about fabric used. So the fabric used for this pattern, New Look 6702, is this tribal print. Now I purchased 12 yards of this fabric, and if you have not seen any of the pieces that I created previously this year, which I sewn 3 items, which is this dress, this top, the jacket, the Anorak jacket that's right behind me, and then the skirt that I have. So for that, I sewn a total of 4 with 12 yards of fabric. Now it was accidental that I had 12 yards of fabric. 6 yards was sent to me and it got lost in the mail. This was back in 2020, the height of the pandemic. It was around Black Friday time. So I reached back out to Smurfette Fabric Shop, which is where I purchased the fabric from. And I said, hey, I never received my package. It's been a month at this point. So they were nice enough to ship it out FedEx instead of USPS, post office. So I gave my word that, hey, if I receive the first package, I will definitely go ahead and pay for it instead of spending another $7, $8 to send it back. Why? I'm paying more money than what it's worth. No. So that's what I did. As soon as I received it, about a month and a half later, I reached back out to the shop and paid my dues. Okay, my word is good. All right, so let's go ahead and talk about pattern pieces. So for the pattern pieces, you need a total of 7 pattern pieces, which you will see in the sew along. That's pattern piece number 1, the upper front, 2, the lower front, 3 is the front godet, which is that area in the front, godet, got it, whatever you want to call it, okay? Number 4 is the upper back, 5 is the lower back, and then 6 is your front facing, and 7 is your back facing. Those are all the pattern pieces that you need in order to construct this, what I am calling the flared skirt, because it does flare out at the bottom. It's just fitted through the hips, all right? Let's talk about pattern sizing. So this pattern only comes in 1 envelope. It comes in 6 through 18 only. So the size that I cut was a size 18. Listen, cutting a size 8, I cut a size 10 at the waist and then graded to the size 18. My bad. So I cut a size 10 at the waist and then graded to an 18. So I cut the entire pattern at a size 10. But then at the hips, I added 2 inches at the hips to give me a 46-inch hips. And I'm going to talk about that on my likes and dislikes. All right, let's talk about modifications. Did I make any modifications to this pattern? No, I did not make any modifications to the pattern except for enlarging the hip area. Everything else I sewed straight out of the package. Even though I wanted to add a waistband, I chose not to do so because I wanted to give this kind of like a beginner friendly pattern with the sew along. So I did not want to do any adding to this pattern. Now, if I revisit this pattern again, I will do a modification, and that's to draft and add a waistband. All right, so did it look like the photos or the drawing on the pattern envelope? Yes, it does. Outside of the fabric, it looks exactly like the pattern envelope. So on the pattern envelope, which I have in my hand now, it looks to me more like view A. It seemed like it's super duper long, but view A is the longer view. View B is the shorter view, and I did view B, but it's still long for me, okay? I'm not gonna chop it up or anything. I could deal with this length. Reason being is because it's not like a yoke in the front where it's, you know, making it look like I'm preggo or anything, because I'm not. So yeah, I could deal with this. This is good. This is a good length for me. Let's talk about the instructions. Are the instructions easy to follow? Yes, they are. However, in the sew along, I made it very easy to sew. So therefore, I did not follow the instructions to the T. If you have not heard from other sewists, you will hear them say they do not use the instructions. They just kind of piece it together, and if they need any assistance, they will go to YouTube, reach out to another sewist that's advanced, and make it do what it do. Now for me, I read the instructions when I'm doing a sew along, just for the sake of the pattern review. However, I like to read the instructions on the steps that they take, and then I go through the steps a second time to determine where I'm going to piece things together. So I don't follow step by step with the instructions, because I have sewn so many things and so many years of sewing. You start developing your own techniques on how to piece things together, which if you're a beginner, take your time, okay? Learn the steps in order, and then when you have done so many different projects, then that's when you want to skip along steps to make it easier for your sewing lifestyle, okay? Let's talk about likes and dislikes. Okay, I'm gonna talk about the likes. So the likes is, I love the fabric. I love the style of the skirt, okay? However, what I dislike, the pattern is not size inclusive. So if you are above a 44-inch hip, you're going to have to make an adjustment, all right? Well, at first, I didn't care about making the adjustment when I picked up this pattern, because my hips are a 44.5. I like to give a little bit of ease to where I'm not squishing in the, you know, basically doing the snake, basically back and forth to try to squeeze in a skirt. I'm not that person that's gonna squeeze in some clothes. That's just not my, not my jam at all. So I like to give 1.5 inches to 2 inches of ease, which is why I decided to go with a 46-inch hip instead of just a 44.5 or a 45. I like to give some room. I enlarged my hips by 2 inches, and when I say it was still tight, it was still tight. Now, I did not measure the pattern pieces for the hip. I went with what they said, and I'm just gonna be real. I don't think that's the correct measurement. I'm gonna go revisit the pattern with some scrap fabric and actually measure and see if what I think that is an incorrect size measurement on the pattern is true. Then it would explain why my hips are still too tight. The garment is still too tight in the hips at a 46, because I measured my hips and we are a 44.5. There should be no reason why it's tight in the hips, okay? Just believe me when I say that. So my suggestion to you is to measure at the hip line, measure using your tape measure, measure across the front and the back. Measure the front, multiply it by 2, minus the seam allowance of 1.25. That's 5/8 of an inch on both sides. Do the same thing on the back pattern piece and then add those two pieces together, okay? That's how you do your measurement. I told you in the sew along what it is for your waist measurement. Now my waist, perfect. No issues whatsoever. The hips was an issue, okay? So also, speaking, that's the likes, okay? I do like the style of style. Dislikes was that issue. Another issue is after I enlarged the pattern to a 46, I noticed I had these peaks. Let me go ahead and get the skirt for you. All right, so we back with the skirt, and I noticed like right here on the side, these are like some peaks going on, like some what we call hip bags, okay? So it was a lot of peeking going on, and I make sure that I don't have sharp edges when I enlarge. I have never had this go on like this, but it's super duper annoying. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep the skirt. I don't want to gift it just yet because I have only worn this a half of a day, okay? It's on both sides, so I'm gonna try to put it up to where you could see this. Like, I don't like this. This is just not, this is tacky to me, okay? So I do not like that in the hip area, and it's on both sides, and that's simply because I had to enlarge the hips 2 inches to get what I wanted. Now, everything else I love. I did some top stitching and everything. Everything else was perfectly fine. I didn't have any issues. Let's talk about first time experiences. So yes, I do have a first time experience, and the first time experience is putting the front Godet, whatever, you know, pattern piece number 3, which I'm going to show you right here, which is this section right here at the very bottom. Putting that on, that was actually easy to put on. It's just I have never done one. So I thought it was, you know, new, and I actually enjoyed putting it on. I didn't have any issues with it whatsoever. So that was my first time experience. All right, so let's talk about would I sew it again. Yes, I would sew this dress again because if you guys know me, I don't like to be defeated. So I have to sew it again just to test it out and see if this was a pattern issue or a Rochelle issue, okay? So for right now, I'm gonna say that this is a pattern issue, not a Rochelle issue. But if I do it a second time and it comes out the exact same, it becomes a Rochelle issue, okay? All right, let's talk about would I recommend this pattern to others. Yes, I would recommend this to others. However, I wanna say if you decide to do this pattern, measure once, measure twice, measure 3 times before you cut your fabric, okay? Before you cut that fabric, measure, okay? All right, so let's talk about my pattern rating. So for this pattern, I wish I could give it a 5 out of 5, but I cannot. I would have to definitely give this pattern a 3.5. And the reason why is because it does not give you a waist measurement. I told you that in the sew along, so you're not, you know, trying to figure out what sides to cut, okay, for your waist. So that is one thing that's just I'm sorry, as a sewist, we want to know what the waist measurement is, the hip measurement, and the total length. So Simplicity, McCall's, Butterick, Vogue, if you are listening to this video, please start putting that on the back of the pattern envelope, because it's annoying to go inside Joann's when we're picking up a pattern and have to open up the pattern in order to figure out what size we need to pick up, okay? It's annoying. If you with me, drop it in the comment below, okay? All right, so that's the first thing. No waist measurement on the pattern envelope or on the tissue paper. The hips, I feel the hips is off, completely off, okay? Because there's no reason why I have those pokes going on at the side when I added 2 inches. And it's super tight. It's not tight to the point where I have to completely, it's tight, but I was able to get photos in it, so I'm not even mad about that. All right, so now that we talked about my pattern rating, let's go ahead and get right on over to the sew along. All right, so let's get into the next sew along as part of the summer skirt series. This is skirt number, I believe, 3 in the summer skirt series, the flared skirt. So this is new look 6702. Now, you guys, this happened to be a not so easy pattern. It's easy, but on the website, I believe it says that it's an average pattern, which means an intermediate beginner, okay? Now, for me, I think it's easy, but the only reason why it's not showing up as easy is because you have that centerpiece, which I don't even really know how to pronounce it, but it's like the Godet or the Godet or whatever you want to call it, okay? That's probably why they're labeling this as average, okay? Now, just to let you know what pattern it is, this new look 6702, let's talk about the tools and supplies you need in order to construct this skirt. Of course, you guys know that I use rotary cutters, one for paper, one for fabric. I never mix the two there. I use scissors, one for paper, one for fabric. I never mix the two there. I have my marking tools, a white pencil for the dark areas of my fabric, a disappearing ink marker, chalk to mark my darts, and then I have pens simply because I did have to size up my pattern just a little bit, and then I have a point turner for if I need to poke out any corners, and of course you're going to need your pens. Now, the only notion that you're going to need in order to construct the skirt is a 7-inch invisible zipper. I will be using a little longer because you guys know I use longer zippers to keep the zipper pull out of my way. All right, so now that we talked about the tools and supplies you will need in order to construct the skirt, let's go ahead and get into the pattern pieces. I'm not going to go over the pattern instructions because it's super easy to do. Seriously, it's super easy to do, and there's no need for me to walk you through the instructions because we're just going to go ahead and just do it, okay? So let's go ahead and get into the pattern pieces. All right, so let's go ahead and get into the pattern pieces that you need in order to construct the skirt. I'm just going to move them out the way quickly. You're going to need pattern piece number 6, which is your front facing. I'm going to turn it over so you can see this. But you're going to cut one on the fold of fabric and one on the fold of interfacing. Next pattern piece is pattern piece number 7. You're going to cut one on the fold of fabric, one on the fold of interfacing for that piece as well. Pattern piece number 5 is the next piece. It's the lower back for both views. You need to cut 2 of fabric. Next pattern piece is pattern piece number 3, which is your front. I believe it's pronounced Godet or Godet. I'm gonna look it up and tell you the correct way of how to say this, but it's spelt wrong on the pattern piece as usual, per the usual. But this is for the front portion of your skirt. You need to cut 1. So single layer of fabric, just 1. Next pattern piece is pattern piece number 2, which is your lower front. You need to cut 2, but you need to have this pattern piece facing down, wrong side of the pattern piece facing up on your fabric, and you're going to cut around. Next pattern piece is pattern piece number 4, which is your upper back. You need to cut 2 of fabric. And the last pattern piece is pattern piece number 1, which is your upper front. You need to cut 2 of fabric. Now make sure you transfer all your notches, your dots, and make your darts. Now, before we move further, I want to show you the waist measurement. Now, one thing that I noticed is the waist measurement is not on the back of the pattern envelope or on the tissue paper. The only thing that they have is the hip measurement. So what I did was I marked where the waistline was, which is 5/8 of an inch from the top. And then I just basically measured across, removed the seam allowance, which on both sides is 5/8 of an inch. So it's 1.25 inches for the front and 1.25 inches for the back, which is 2.5. So I added the front and the back minus 2.5 inches. And this is what I have. So if you are a size 6, if you want to cut a size 6, just note that the waist measurement is a 31.25, size 8 a 32.25, size 10 a 33.5, size 12 a 34.75, size 14 a 36, size 16 a 38, and then a size 18 is a 40.25. Now for me, I am cutting a size 10 because my waist is fluctuating right now between a 32 and a half and a 33. So I figured if I have a little bit too much room, I could take out on the sides after I finish cutting. I don't want to do a 32.25 and then it's too tight. So I rather go up a little bit to a 33.5 and possibly have too much room in the waist. Okay, so I'll be cutting a size 10. Make sure you cut whatever size it is for you. Also for the hip, I did go up and add 2 inches. So basically I would have cut a size 18, but I just graded from the 10 to the 18 from the waist to the hips. Okay, so my waist measurement will be a 33.5, but my hips will be a 46. Okay, so just if you wanted to know what I did, I just basically measured out a 1/2 inch at the hips, because a 1/2 times a 4, 2 for the front, 2 for the back. A 1/2 times 4 is 2 inches. So I just measured out a 1/2 inch and then made that line to curve around the hips. Okay, that's what I did. You could do the same thing if you need to size up your pattern. All right, so now that we talked about that, let's go ahead and get right on into the sewing. All right, so let's go ahead and get into the sewing of this skirt, the flared skirt. Now, the first thing I want you to do is go ahead and grab pattern piece number 1 and pattern piece number 2. All right, so on pattern piece number 1, the first thing you're going to do is stay stitch. Now you're going to stay stitch from the side seam all the way to the center front. Okay, so basically where your hip area is, that's where you're going to stay stitch. Start your stay stitch at a 1/2 inch seam allowance, stay stitch along the top. Now if I were you, I would go ahead and stay stitch the upper front, the upper back. So basically pattern piece number 1 and pattern piece number 4, I believe, is the upper back. Go ahead and do all your stay stitching all at once. After you do that, go ahead and make your darts. You're going to make your darts in both the upper front and the upper back, which are pattern piece number 1 and pattern piece number 4. Make all your darts at once. It would save you a lot of time, okay? Instead of looking at the instructions, just go ahead and do what I'm telling you to do now. All right? Now, after you do that, for pattern piece number 1, grab pattern piece number 2, and I'm going to flip mine. Now, before I flip mine over, I want to say that because it looks the same on both the right and the wrong side, I marked the wrong side of my fabric with the number. So this one is pattern piece number 1, and UF stands for upper front. Okay, I also marked pattern piece number 2, which I'm going to show you that. Pattern piece number 2, LF stands for lower front. So I know which one is the right side and the wrong side simply because my fabric looked the same on both sides. Okay, now what I'm going to do is turn my pattern piece number 1, my upper front, and I'm going to look at it where the bottom of my skirt, well, the upper portion of my skirt is facing me. Okay, and the bottom of my skirt at the angle is on the table away from me. Okay, and with right sides together, I'm going to pin this curve for pattern piece number 1 to pattern piece number 2, or pattern piece number 2 to pattern piece number 1. You get what I'm saying. All right, so the first thing you want to do is match up your notches. Okay, so you have a notch right here, so you want to match up your notches on both sides. Okay, well, on this side. Now you will have a little peak right there. It is okay. You will end up cutting that little peak off at the end right there, and then you will have make sure that you pin at the bottom as well, and then pin across the bottom of it. Pin across the rest of it, okay? So go ahead and pin now. Now that you have this pin, using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, backstitch at the beginning and at the end, and then finish off your seam allowance, okay? Now, one thing I'm gonna tell you is I'm gonna finish off my seam allowance, and then I'm gonna top stitch to give it a little bit of definition, a little bit of elements to it, you know, to where it doesn't look like a plain skirt. Also, while you're doing this, you want to do the exact same thing for pattern piece number 4. You are setting yourself up for not going to the sewing machine so many times. So what you would do is, I'm gonna move this out of the way. Just remember 5/8 of an inch, backstitch at the beginning and at the end. Now grab pattern piece number 4 and pattern piece number 5, which are your upper back and your lower back, and you're going to do the exact same thing by just matching up your notch that you have there and pin across. So go ahead and do that for both your upper front and your upper back. Basically stitching the lower front to your upper front and your lower back to your upper back. Go ahead and do that now. All right, so now that I have the upper front attached to the lower front, I press my seams down towards the lower front. I did the exact same thing for my upper back and my lower back. I made sure to finish it off and press the seam allowance down towards the lower back. I did the exact same thing. So the next thing, I think we are at step number 4, I believe. I'm not following along with the instructions, but you can if you choose to. The next thing we're going to do is go ahead and sew our center front seam. That's where you have the notch right there, and then you have a dot, okay? So go ahead and pin at your notch. Pin at this dot that you have right here, and then you want to pin at the top and pin along the center front seams now. So go ahead and pin the center front now. All right, so now that I have the center front pin using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, backstitch at the beginning, and then you want to backstitch at this dot. Do not go past this dot right here. So go ahead and do that now and finish off your seams. Now I will be finishing off my seams separately. So if I were you, I would go ahead and serge this edge first before you attach it at 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Go ahead and do that now. All right, so now that I have my upper front attached together at the center front, and I went ahead and finished off my seam allowance, then I attached them 5/8 of an inch seam allowance and pressed my seams open. Now go ahead and turn your front pattern pieces, or front pieces, with right sides up on the table, right? And you want to grab pattern piece number 3, which is your front godet, godet, whatever you want to call it, okay? Go ahead and grab that. Now you should have only cut one of these. Now I'm gonna mark a number 3 because this is the wrong side of my fabric. The other side is the right side of my fabric. And then I don't really need to mark what it is because I know exactly what it is. So what we're going to do is I'm going to turn, you can turn it this way, or you could keep it the way that it is. I think I'm gonna keep it this way and attach it with right sides together. So you're going to, it's gonna look really awkward to say the least. All right, so what you wanna do is you want to attach it. So you have dots. So you have a dot here at the top, and then you have a dot right here, right there, that meets up with the dots right here that you have on your lower front. And then the dot that's in the center right here meets up with this dot right here that you stopped when you were sewing your upper front together. And then you have notches. So you're going to match up at the notches and then pin at your dots, okay? Now what I'm going to do, how I'm going to do this is I'm going to go ahead and attach one side and then the opposite side, okay? So the first thing I'm going to do is attach one side with right sides together, and then I'm gonna sew down. So go ahead and attach one side, making sure you match up your notches. So I'm just gonna go ahead and pin one side. Make sure your notches matches up. You want to make sure those notches match up perfectly, beautifully, okay? So I'm gonna move this side out of my way so you can see this. I have the wrong side facing up towards me, and I'm going to pin at that notch. I'm going to pin this dot to this dot like this. Now, make sure you did not sew all the way down and close it off, but I'm going to pin that dot. And then I'm just gonna pin the length of one side, okay? So go ahead and pin the length of this side as well now. All right, so now that I have my Godet or pattern piece number 3 pinned to my lower front and pinned to the upper portion of my upper front using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, back stitch at the beginning and at the end, and then finish off your seam. Once you do that, you're going to take the other side and pin this side to the other side of your upper front. Go ahead and do that now. All right, so now that I have my center Godet, got it, whatever you calling it, right? Since I have that already sewn on, I went ahead and pressed. Now on the instructions, it says to press your seams away from the Godet, got it, whatever, right? So you're gonna press your seam towards the lower front, all right? After I did that, I went ahead and did some top stitching to keep my seams pressed towards the lower front instead of it keeps coming towards the Godet, okay? All right, so now that we have done that, move your front out of the way quickly. Grab your back pattern pieces, right? So I have my upper back attached to my lower back. So the next thing we're going to do is go ahead and sew our center back seam from the top to the bottom. Now I have this already pinned, so using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, back stitch at the beginning and back stitch at the end. Once you do that, you could, now this is completely up to you if you want to finish off your seams together like I will be doing, or if you want to finish off your seams separately. That's a personal preference. That's up to you. I will be finishing off my seams together for this one because there will not be a zipper right here, okay? So go ahead and sew your center back seams now. All right, so now that I went ahead and sewn my center back seam together, right sides together at 5/8 of an inch seam allowance and finished off my seam allowance, now what we're going to do is go ahead and with right sides together, sew our side seams. So this is the back of my skirt facing up on the table. I'm going to go ahead and put my front right on top. Now this part is a completely up to you situation, okay? And what I mean by that is you can decide what side you want your zipper to be on. Now for me, I want my zipper on the left hand side, so I am going to be pinning on the right hand side, okay? So how you can tell what side yours is on, just take the front part or the back part and just put it up to your waist where you want it, where you're going to have it. And then just take a little pin like I did and just pin that side so you know, do not sew that side, sew the opposite side, okay? So that's what I'm gonna do. So what I'm gonna do is turn my skirt to where I could pin right sides together, and I'm going to pin all the way down the length of the skirt. So go ahead and pin the length of the skirt now. So now that I have the side seams pinned on the side that I will not have the zipper in, using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, back stitch at the beginning and sew the side seam and back stitch at the end. Once you do that, go ahead and finish off your seams. Go ahead and do that now. All right, so the next step, so what I did was I went ahead and sewed my side seams. I finished it off. Now on the other side, I went ahead and pinned, but I'm going to tell you what you need to do. So you have a notch right up here at the top. You need to pin from the top to that notch. Now, that's where your zipper is going to be, so you will not be sewing this up at all. Well, right now, you'll be basting from that notch all the way to the top, all right? So I went ahead and pinned. After you pin with right sides together, using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance and a regular length stitch, you're going to back stitch at the hem. So all the way up to this notch, back stitch at the notch, and then switch to a basting stitch, which is the longest length of the longest stitch on your machine. And then sew, you do not need to back stitch, but sew from the notch all the way up. Once you do that, press your seams open and then do your zipper. Now, before you do that, I want you to go ahead and insert separately from the notch all the way up before you sew it together. If you have never seen me do an invisible zipper, go back to one of my videos, which I will link on the end screen, for the Sew What series that teaches you how to do an invisible zipper. But you want to finish this seam allowance off before you baste it closed, okay? So go ahead and sew from the hem all the way up to the notch using a regular length stitch, and then baste from the notch all the way up, and then go ahead and do your invisible zipper. Once you do that, come on back so we could finish up with our facing. Go ahead and do that now. All right, so now that I have finished off my zipper, it's looking good. All right, so the next thing you want to do is go ahead and move your skirt out of the way. And the last thing we're going to do is go ahead and do our facing, okay? So I did mark on mine 6F for 6 front and 7B for 7 back. Pattern piece number 7, which means the back of my facing, okay? And pattern piece number 6, which is the front of my facing. So with right sides together, right? So you're gonna have 6 and 7. So 7's on the table, 6 is on top of 7. And with right sides together, you're going to pin. Now you're going to pin one side seam. Now before I pin, you may want to check and see how you have your zipper. Because if you happen to place your zipper where it's zipping to the right, you need to pin right sides together and pin on the right side, okay? If you have your zipper where it's going to be zipping on the left, you need to pin the left side and leave the right side open, okay? So you could determine that when you get to it or whatever, what side you need to definitely leave open. But the easiest way of checking to see what side you need to leave open is to grab your skirt and lay your front. That's where you have the Godet or whatever, got it, in the front. And the best thing to do is lay your facing like this, and then the back. So I know I need to pin on this side, okay? To where when right sides together, it will work out perfectly, okay? So I'm gonna pin, I'm gonna move my skirt out of the way so you can see this. I'm going to pin on my left side. So let me go ahead and pin top and bottom. And then I'm going to go to the sewing machine and using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, I'm gonna back stitch at the beginning and at the end, sew my side seam, and then press my seams open. After I press it open, I'm going to serge or finish off the bottom edge of my facing. So go ahead and do that now. All right, so now that I have my front to back facing right sides together, I'm gonna go ahead and grab my skirt. And what you're going to do is with right side facing, make sure you have the 6F and you have it pinned on the right side, okay? On the front, not the back. So what you're going to do is you have a notch in the center. You're going to match up that notch and match up your side seams as well. So I'm going to match up my side seam first, and I'm going to pin right here where my side seam. I'm going to pin there, making sure that the seam allowance for my side seam is facing the back of my skirt. I'm going to pin. And after matching up that side seam, I'm going to pin all the way around, making sure that at the front and at the back, I pin over my zipper teeth, okay? Zipper tape, I'm sorry. Zipper tapes. So you want to go ahead and pin that now. Go ahead and pin all the way around your skirt. You're facing to your skirt now. All right, so now that I have the facing pinned all the way around with the right sides together, using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance and a regular length stitch, back stitch at the beginning and sew all the way around your facing. Once you do that, trim your facing down and press your seam allowance up towards your facing. Go ahead and do that now. All right, so now that I went ahead and attach the facing onto the skirt, right sides together, and I sewed 5/8 of an inch seam allowance all the way around. I finished off my zipper tape. That's basically just sewing as close to the zipper tape as possible without sewing on the zipper tape. And then after I did that all the way around, I made sure to press my seams up towards the facing and then understitch. Understitch is done at a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. Now that I have all of that done, I'm going to turn my facing to the inside, making sure to clear that zipper teeth, and that zipper teeth should be nice and flawless and finished, okay? Also, do the same thing to the other side, and if you need your point turner, this is why I say you may need your point turner. You can poke out that edge right there of your zipper, okay? Now what you're going to do is go to this your pressing table, your ironing station, wherever you press. Make sure to press your facing down, okay? So you're gonna press it down all the way around. I'm gonna need to do that to mine. Press it all the way down. Once you press all the way down, what I would do is go ahead and tack it down like on the side seams and possibly near your darts. Then that way you don't have it flopping up. So I'm just gonna make a couple of tacks in between, like where I have the darts and side seams and stuff like that. And the center back, I'm gonna make sure to tack it down right there. All right. Once you do that, the only thing left for you to do is top stitch at about a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. Now me personally, it's a personal preference. I'm gonna top stitch at 3/8 of an inch seam allowance all the way around, and that's just to basically hold the facing down, but it will hold if you just tack it down as well to where you don't have to top stitch. That's completely up to you. I think instead of me top stitching all the way around, I'm just gonna tack it down in different places to where I don't have to top stitch. Once you do that, the only thing left for you to do is go ahead and hem your skirt. I already did mine, but hem your skirt at 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Once you do that, you are all done with your skirt. If you make this skirt New Look 6702, be sure to tag me on Instagram at Rochelle.Handmade.Designs. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video. Alright, so there you have it. That is the complete pattern review and the sew along. I hope you enjoyed. And if you make this, don't forget to tag me at Rochelle.Handmade.Designs. So don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Turn on the notification bell so you are notified every time I upload a new video. So I'll catch you in the next video, and as always, keep sewing.